Start streaming. Let's see. I wonder if I am live. I'm going to check real quick. So, unfortunately, I accidentally just ended my last live stream. It looks like I'm live again on YouTube. I'm hoping that anyone who was just in my previous live stream there is going to be able to find this again. So this is actually now part 2 of my live stream on Friday, March 22nd. Again, my name is Hector Acuna. Welcome back to another video. If you were watching the first portion of the live stream, I hope that you've found this one again, where I'm talking about my 2023 plein air portfolio. So if you're watching this video first, make sure you go back and watch the part 1 section, which was ended early accidentally on my part there. So let's go ahead and just jump right back in. I'm a little bit frustrated and flustered now because I kind of lost the chat that I had in the last video, and I was getting a few different questions there. So let me just really quickly share this with folks that maybe were tuned into the last one, just so they can find the conversation again. So, sorry, one moment here. I'm just resharing the link for anyone who maybe was tuned in before. Man, I do not know why I just did that. Okay, let's go ahead and keep going here. Sorry, welcome back, Jane. I was going to switch between some of my settings in my streaming software and accidentally clicked the end broadcast button. So I had to really just quickly start another live stream. I'm hoping that Todd and whoever else was in the last live stream will be able to find this one, and we can carry on with the conversation that I started. My apologies there. I don't know how or why that happened, but we're back again. Now this is the part 2 section of the 2023 plein air portfolio. So let's just try to jump back in from where we left off real quick. Hey Todd, welcome back. Sorry about that. I was just telling Jane that I accidentally clicked the wrong button and ended the stream. So my apologies about that. I'm sure everyone's like, what the heck? Where'd he go? So as we were saying, I just wanted to share one last thing about gouache and casein paint. So with gouache, it is really nice to be able to travel, and you can get a lot of different tubes from different companies. 2 of my favorite brands that I like to use are M-Gram and Winsor Newton. And I use the traditional gouache as opposed to the acrylic gouache from Holbein. There's, I think, maybe one other company that is making acrylic gouache these days. And, there's varieties that you're going to find between the paint viscosity and some of those details. So definitely try a couple different brands if you can to figure out which one you like the best. But the reason I like those 2 is because Winsor Newton has a really good pigment library, and they like to use the same pigments across different mediums, whether it's oil paint, acrylic, gouache, watercolor. You're pretty much getting the same pigment regardless of the type of paint that you're working with. So that's definitely a pro when you're working with a new medium, is to have really high quality pigments, especially if you're used to oil painting or some of these other types of mediums. So anyway, right now I would say I'm more of a gouache painter. And the other thing I forgot I was going to share was in terms of protecting the surface of your paintings, traditionally you would have to frame a gouache painting behind glass because of the, how susceptible it is to moisture damaging the painting. So for a long time, I would just frame all of my gouache paintings on paper behind glass. And if I was traveling for a plein air show, it just made everything a little bit heavier. It made things a little bit more bulky and, just kind of tricky to deal with. So I tried to do some research, and somewhere along the lines, I found some advice from artists who work with gouache or watercolor to use a UV archival matte varnish spray from Krylon as a way to protect the surface from UV rays and exposure to UV rays. That way your pigments aren't fading as quickly. And then once that varnish layer is dry, you can then seal the painting with a wax medium. And I like to use Dorland's wax medium as my protective coat against moisture then, because the wax will resist a lot of moisture, which is very handy. So anyway, that's kind of a workaround with the fragility of using gouache as opposed to casein, because as I said, casein is a little bit more durable of a paint. Gouache is something you have to really think about, the archivalness of it and the fragility of the medium. So I hope that helps with anyone who's maybe on the fence between gouache and casein paint. So anyway, let's get back into the portfolio and try to find the momentum that we had going in the first part of that last stream. So again, if you're tuning back in, welcome back. You found the same stream in part 2. That was an unplanned part of today's conversation. So I promise that will not happen again. Okay, so we're looking at this 6 by 9 inch oil painting on a panel painted also in my neighborhood. This was just sort of walking around. I was eager to get back into plein air painting in the late winter months, like, this time of year, late March. And, it was kind of warming up a little bit, kind of like this year, actually. And there were these interesting little piles of snow on the sidewalks and in people's front yards where, I was looking for subject matter to paint from observation, and brought out this little 6 by 9 inch panel and a very limited palette of colors, and did this study of the shape and dimensions of a pile of snow, which honestly, if you're trying to practice things like color temperature and subtlety and value range, a snowbank is one of the greatest natural subjects you can paint from because of those very limited contrasts that it offers, and it forces us to really commit to certain planes and structures of its form and shape without any sort of high chroma color palettes, without having any really dramatic shifts in value as well. So I had a lot of fun painting this because it's a fairly abstract painting from a distance, and then when you start to put these pieces together, you start to combine and make sense of the structure of the form and of the subject. Jane was asking about glass with gouache. So yeah, with those two materials, the UV varnish spray that I was just mentioning and the Dorland's wax medium, you're able to get by without glass, I found. And again, when I sell those paintings, I try to be pretty transparent about what a collector is getting. And on the back of the paintings, I try to write notes of just advice of I would not put this anywhere where it's going to get a lot of direct sunlight. I've noticed this once before where when I'm doing the wax layer, if I let the painting sit outside in direct sunlight, I had this little 4 by 6 inch painting, a gouache painting, where I did that process, and I left it in the sun on a tabletop surface when I was doing other things, and I came back and 25 minutes later, all of that wax had melted pretty much into the surface of the paper and into the surface of the painting. So I don't think it's bad for the paint necessarily, and I don't even know if it really absorbed into the paint or the paper. It just, the surface of the wax was more sunken in, And I also wonder if maybe the evaporation of the other ingredients in the medium just shifted the quality of the wax, because it's not just beeswax in the medium. It's also mineral spirits. It's also, I think, some kind of a damar resin ingredient as well. And because of those other chemicals and materials that are in the medium of the Dorland's wax, you really want to make sure that you're using it with proper ventilation as well as that UV spray, that matte varnish spray. So I always do those steps outside in open air, and I really try to avoid doing any of those steps inside, because you don't want to be breathing those chemicals in. Okay, back to the paintings here. This is another neighborhood painting, limited palette painting. This was one that I had a lot of fun painting because it has these very simple geometric shapes that depict a lot of organic subjects like the trees and these hedges. So the painting is titled Spring Hedges in Umber and Yellow, because I used raw umber and cadmium yellow medium and titanium white, and that was my entire palette for this painting, which is interesting because there's a lot of green tones and green hues in this painting. And that's because when you mix raw umber with the yellow and a little bit of white, or maybe no white at all, you'll get this greenish, this really lush green color. And because of the contrast of raw umber and pure yellow, it'll read as green because you have a very coolish gray from the umber and a very warm yellow from your yellow. And the context of those contrasts and relationships will trick the eye to see something as being green, which I always thought was fascinating. You know, this idea of relativity in color, that you really don't need a blue and a red to hit some of these hue contrasts and temperature contrasts in a painting, which is really satisfying. So this 6x9 painting was a one session painting. It has a very fresh gestural quality that I also really liked, especially in the trees behind the house. And I was drawn to this scene because of the shape of the shadows on the hedges. They were very just bizarre and unique within the languages of shape in the rest of that scene. So when I'm looking for something that's in kind of like an ordinary, everyday environment like a neighborhood, I'm thinking about shapes and like, where do I see interesting shapes? And not only that one particular shape, but then I think about the relationship it has to the rest of the space. And I saw this cast shadow on the hedge, and the shape that it created was so unique and different from the rest of the scene that I was like, that's a pretty interesting moment and relationship on its own. I think in a painting it could hold its own as the focal point of a painting. So that's what drew me to this scene. And this painting sold last year actually at Paint Cedarburg. I was one of the 3 judges for the event last year, and there was an artist from Michigan who came in, and I'm forgetting his last name. Kurt, I think, is his first name, maybe. He participated in the show, and then he actually bought two of my framed plein air paintings that I exhibited as one of the judges. So that was one of them. The other one I'll be showing here in a moment. This is a painting I made while I was out in Morris, Minnesota, teaching at the University of Morris, Minnesota. I taught for that university for 3 semesters remotely through Zoom, which, as you can imagine, is not the easiest thing to do. But I applaud all of the students I taught for being really, suitable students and maintaining, a real respect for the classroom, a respect for the curriculum, for that format. I mean, granted, they had to do that for like a year during their collegiate experiences because of COVID, but it made my job a lot easier to have a group of students every semester that was really committed to whatever the format was going to be. Their patience and resourcefulness is something that I still, think about today. But anyway, part of my not contract, but part of what I committed to doing as the instructor of the class was I told the university that I would try my best to get to campus once a semester, so I drove out there for a week at a time, 3 semesters in a row when I was teaching for them. And this is from one of those trips. So this is a building on their campus, really close to the art building, painted from observation. And I would teach on usually like a Tuesday and Thursday. And so on Mondays, Wednesdays, and like in the mornings of Tuesdays and Thursdays, I would just be on campus kind of hanging out in the studio. If students wanted to come in and talk about their paintings, or just, sit and talk about painting, or just sit in silence and paint together, I told students I would typically be there, most of those hours during the week outside of our scheduled class time. And so I tried to stay near the studio, and I did this plein air 6 by 9 inch painting with a limited palette of, I think it was phthalo green, and cadmium red light, which, looking at the painting, there's no moment of just pure cadmium red light, like the color right out of the tube, which if you've ever used that pigment, you know how intense and strong of a pigment it is. So what I did is I had pre-mixed a few color piles on my palette, and I tinted up cadmium red light. And I tried to keep the majority of the chroma kind of on the cooler green complement of red with my phthalo green. But it was a very fun painting to make. As I zoom in here, you can see there's a lot of very muted levels of chroma in this painting. Most of it is fairly high key in value, and it's very abstract in a lot of areas when you look up close. Todd is asking if I've considered using cold wax while plein air painting, and that he's considering trying it. I personally haven't used cold wax. I don't really use it as a medium for my oil paintings. So far I just use it as that sealing kind of agent. I think the biggest reason why I stay away from it with my oil paintings is just because it takes a while for it to cure and to really kind of tack up and harden. If you use Gamblin's cold wax medium, which I've used before, it has a very granular kind of body to it from what I remember, and texture, which I just wasn't a fan of. And it also makes your paintings more matte in reflective surface quality, which I also am not really interested in at the moment. So those are some of the bigger reasons why I haven't personally used them. I know artists that use it pretty religiously in their work, and I think that's just you either really like the texture that it gives your paintings or you don't. And I think it's definitely worth trying anything and everything in your own process. I'm a big believer in don't knock it until you try it, and Jane is saying that she's tried it before and that it slides off the panel and it doesn't really work well in warmer temperatures, which, that's probably true depending on the time of year that you're using it. There's probably ways to combat that if you're painting in the summer, if you stay in the shade, or the amount of wax medium that maybe you're putting into your paintings just has to be a very careful amount of that balance between paint and the medium. But what's nice about cold wax medium is that it gives us this middle ground between oil painting and encaustic painting. And if you're unfamiliar with encaustic painting, that's a beeswax based painting practice where artists will take oil paint that has been mixed with beeswax and typically a damar resin that's been melted down, and you can buy the paint as a solid sort of brick of color, and then you melt that down into more of a liquid that then you can apply to your substrate, which is typically a very durable, hard substrate like a wood panel, and then you can build up your layers of paint using wax. Now, kind of like other fast drying mediums I was talking about earlier, encaustic will dry very quickly as well. And a lot of encaustic artists will use heat guns to reactivate the paint, to blend their colors, or to sort of dig, kind of carve or dig back into their paintings. Melting the wax also gives you these really beautiful blends and organic kind of drips and pooling of color. So from what I've seen, it's a very seductive medium because of that luminous, waxy quality that it offers. Now, we're talking about wax medium, and that's kind of a way to kind of get some of those qualities in our oil paintings without needing a full, you know, like vacuum air hood system that you need if you're an encaustic painter, because Damar resin and linseed oil and some of those materials in oil paint, you really want to be careful about overheating, so it can be toxic. So if you're ever looking into that, make sure you're doing plenty of research, and I would highly encourage reaching out to someone who already uses some of these materials and getting some advice. That way you have a guide and you have someone that you can ask questions with. Okay, back to the portfolio. This is a plein air painting I made during the Plein Air Convention and Expo last year in 2023. It was based in the Denver area of Colorado, and every day there were scheduled paint outs where people could drive or take a bus to different towns and cities where you would then paint as a big community of artists. It wasn't like a plein air event or festival. There was no awards, there was no exhibition. It really was just about that time in painting and that sense of camaraderie and community that this format offers. Because from what I've heard and what I witnessed last year, typically there's anywhere from like 600 to 1,000 people that attend the convention. So you get a very big tribe of plein air painters that will sort of like almost like flash mob these small towns and make plein air paintings. So the first paint out was in Golden, Colorado, and I chose to study this side of a hardware store and some of the buttes behind, or like mesas maybe they're called, behind the downtown area of Golden, Colorado. And I think this is a 5 by 10 inch oil painting on gessoed paper. So it's one of those same papers I was talking about earlier in the first part of the stream. And I just used an acrylic gesso once the paper, actually I'm trying to remember now if I think I just went right in with Utrecht acrylic gesso. And typically I'll do like 3 or 4 coats of gesso, and then I'll do a very light sanding with like 220 grit sandpaper. Sometimes I'll use a little bit of water to keep the dust from going out into the environment, because those are basically microplastics when you're sanding acrylic gesso. But I'll use water, and then I'll take a damp shop towel and wipe off all the extra dust that might be on the surface. And then once that's dry all the way, then I'll do some sort of a toned color on the gesso. That way it's not, again, that bright white surface. And I think for these ones I used an acrylic, like bright gray, kind of middle gray color. Todd, have a nice day. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for contributing to the chat and the conversation today. It was fun chatting with you. I'm excited to see you in Cedarburg in June. So have a wonderful rest of your day. And hopefully there's only one video, this video, that you have to catch up on if you do decide to tune back in later in the recording. But yeah, so I used an acrylic sort of muted light wash as my toned ground for this painting. Actually for all of the paintings I made during the plein air convention. And once I was back home after that trip in the summer, when I had a little bit of extra time, I sealed the backs of the paper with Golden's GAC 100, which is just kind of a generic polymer-based medium, but it's specifically designed, or it was designed to be a oil penetration barrier type of medium. So if you're working with oil paints, it works really well as a sizing agent, which historically artists would use melted rabbit skin glue as a way to seal, or what we call size, the organic substrates that they were painting on, whether that was wood panel or canvas. And then they would go on top of that with an oil primer or a traditional chalk gesso, which had a mixture of melted rabbit skin glue with calcium carbonate, which is just basically chalk. Anyway, so the word gesso has kind of morphed into more of a acrylic-based material. So if you're reading about historic painting mediums and you see the word gesso, typically they're talking about that rabbit skin glue gesso, not acrylic, polymer-based gessos like we have in stores today. This is a gouache painting on paper. I think it's about 6 by 8 inches, if I'm remembering correctly. It was, the study of the El Dorado River in the El Dorado Canyon. So this was the second paint out day that we had during the convention, and it was a lot of fun to paint this study of moving water. I'm not known for painting water. I tend to stay, towards architecture and subjects that don't move and that don't have any kind of like real translucency as part of their, physical makeup. I like things that are more structural and have more of a geometric kind of opacity to them. So I was trying to challenge myself here and focus on water and moving water, and definitely some things that could be improved and really practiced in that realm of subject matter for me. But there are some things that I do like about the way that this painting turned out. So one of the first things being the range in hues that this painting was able to kind of hit over the session. I think it took me probably about an hour and a half or 2 hours to make this painting. And this was also mounted to a panel once I came home, which I forgot to finish telling that story. So with all of these paper paintings from Colorado, from the convention over the summer, I sealed the backs of the paper and then I glued them to plywood, like birch plywood panels, with a bookbinding archival glue. So, and then I cradled all of the panels and made frames for most of them. So they're all framed up and ready to find their forever homes, find their collectors. So if you're watching this recording, or if you're here live, a lot of these paintings I'm talking about today may be available. So if you're interested, feel free to reach out, or just go check out my online shop where they might already be available for purchase. Here's another oil painting. This is an 8 by 10 inch painting on paper, also from El Dorado Canyon from the convention. I was drawn to this tree line off of the main dirt road that took us up into the canyon. It was a very bumpy road, and what was interesting about it is that if you're going up the mountain, on the right side you have the canyon with the river, but then on the left side you have this sort of cliff mountainside, not cliffside, but mountainside with trees and pretty dense forest. So it was kind of a nice, contrast in subject matter. And for, again, someone who doesn't really prefer to paint things that are moving or translucent, I found my way over by the tree line here, and I really liked the composition of this diagonal of the vertical trees and the general triangular sort of form of this little hillside here. So I tried my best to portray some of the textures in the foliage, and really just focus on mark and line in this painting. So I was really trying to think about variety and contrast of line and shape, and the density of marks in some areas versus more open, more uniform areas, and thinking about that proportion of information. And when I talk about contrast, when I teach workshops, that's something I also try to remind myself and students about, is that a lot of times when we hear the word contrast, most people think of light and dark, like value contrast. But there's so many different aspects and like categories for the idea of contrast. You can talk about color contrast or temperature in color contrast. You can talk about contrast in chroma, how saturated or desaturated a particular area of a painting is. You can talk about contrast in direction. If all of your lines are moving vertically like this, if you throw one horizontal in there, that's a really big contrast in line, orientation or direction. We can also talk about proportion having contrast. So a really big shape is going to contrast a very small mark in your painting. So when I'm thinking about composition, I'm also thinking about contrast in those terms as well. And that has been very helpful for me to really understand the formal structure of my paintings in terms of the compositions. This is one that I made with gouache on paper, not during the convention. It was actually right after the convention. I extended my trip when I bought my tickets. I added a few extra days on the back end of the convention to keep my rental car and drive. I think it was like a 4.5 hour drive northwest to a little mountain town called Crested Butte, or Crested Butte, as the locals call it. And it's funny because I've known about this little mountain town for a very long time, since I was in high school, because my girlfriend that I was dating in high school, her mother grew up in the town of Crested Butte. And when I was planning my trip for the convention, I had heard from some friends, or just through researching online, that there's a gallery. Excuse me, I have to stretch for a second here. There's a gallery in Crested Butte that hosts a plein air festival, but it's not an annual show. It's a very small, kind of like mom and pop style event, and it's a successful event because it's a very beautiful area. It's a kind of a touristy place, and I really wanted to paint there. And it just so happened that the gallery, Sean Horn Gallery, he's also an artist who started and runs the event. He only does the event like once every 5 to 8 years. So when I saw that he was hosting the show this year and that there was an open category, I was like, I'm going there. I'm going to do it. And I'm sorry, I'm building up my story, but I have to pause to use the restroom real quick. I will be right back. So hold tight and I'll finish that story. All right, and we are back. Thank you for hanging out. So as I was saying, I'm talking about this painting in Crested Butte, and so Sean Horn Gallery, like I said, he only opens that show once every 5, maybe even 5 to 10 years, and it had been maybe even longer than that since the last show that he did. Since I was going to be in Denver, I thought, if I'm flying out there, maybe I should try to make a second trip up to Crested Butte. And so that's what I did. Now, this is kind of a crazy story. I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible. When I was flying to Denver from Milwaukee's airport, I remember I was on a fairly small plane. It was like, there were just 2 seats on either side of the aisle. And, we're getting on the plane. Almost everyone is on the plane. And the seat next to me is open. And I'm starting to think, oh, maybe I'll get the little row to myself. That'll be kind of nice. And I already had the window seat, but I was greedy and I wanted that whole area to myself. And I'm like waiting, and like the last little group of people are coming down the aisle. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching these people come down to find their seats, and like the third person in that row is this woman, and I'm looking at her and I'm like, I think I know that person. And as she's getting closer and closer, I'm like, oh my gosh, that is Vicky. That's the mom of the girlfriend that I had in high school who grew up in Crested Butte. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so crazy. And as she's getting closer, she looks at the seat and she sits down in the seat next to me. And I'm just like, I'm like, I'm sorry, is your name Vicky? And she said, yeah. And then as I was saying, like, I don't know if you remember me, my name is Hector. And as I was saying my name, she was like, oh my gosh, Hector. And we were both just immediately just like in like awe, just this crazy serendipitous moment, of seeing this person I haven't seen in like 12 years. And, I had dated her daughter, Sarah, for like, I think like 2 years, so I got to know their family really well, went on trips with them, and her parents and her family were really great people and friends while I was in high school. And, it was really nice to be able to fly from Milwaukee to Colorado, like to begin this whole adventure at the convention with this friend who I haven't seen in so long. So that was a really exciting part of that whole week and that whole journey. And so I was telling her about going to Crested Butte, and that's where she was going as well, to see some family. And we were there at the same time. And I was only I was only in Crested Butte for a night, so I didn't have a lot of time to meet up with her or any of the family, and they had a lot of plans too. So it was nice though to spend the 3.5 hour flight just catching up and talking. And yeah, it was one of the craziest experiences I had in 2023. But anyway, so this was a painting I made in Crested Butte in that like 24-hour time frame. And so we're going to jump a little bit around between paintings during the convention and paintings from Crested Butte. So this is painted during the convention. The last day that we were there, we had plans, like the whole community of the convention planned to go to the Rocky Mountain National Park, which was about an hour and 15 minutes away from Westminster, which is where the convention center was and where most of the events were kind of happening, with demos and the expo hall and that kind of stuff. And so I rode out to the national park with my friend Maximiano Hanairo, who's an artist based in Milwaukee, a really good friend of mine who I met during the some of these plein air events around Wisconsin. We've been in a couple of the same events together, and it was a lot of fun to ride out and paint with him during the day and to ride back and have dinner together. And we spent all this time together during the convention because he was there as well. And when the convention ended and I started heading to Crested Butte and Max started making his way home, it was funny. We kind of joked about just like how it felt like we were going through a breakup because we had spent so much time together during the convention, and we had so much fun just talking and painting and going on these road trips during the week together. It was very nice of him to offer to drive to some of those paint outs during the convention. But anyway, this was the first painting I made during that day that we were in the Rocky Mountain National Park. This was up in Bear Lake. It's like this really beautiful loop of a trail that you can hike, and you're kind of in this canyon in the mountains. So I chose to focus and crop this very, very small section of the ridge line in the mountains there, and I really was drawn to the shapes of the snow patches and the jagged edges of the rock, and the very kind of character-rich qualities of the clouds. There were these very distinct shapes that I was seeing in the clouds that I was sort of Frankensteining together in my painting. And this is with oil paint on gessoed paper, and the size is 8 by 10 inches. And this is the other one that I made up in Bear Lake. I'll zoom in to give us a quick look at some of the details here. You can see there's a real patchiness about some of the sections of paint. And I'm really thinking about shape and edge and paint consistency. I was a little bit weary to use too much paint and have too much of an impasto kind of thick texture with my paint because I was going to have to fly home with all of these wet paintings if they weren't dry by the time my returning flight was scheduled. So this is about as textural as my paintings were in Colorado during that week. And this painting is 5 inches by 10 inches, and it's looking at Hallett Peak, which again you can see right from the kind of like entrance way of Bear Lake when you come in to start that loop. This is part of the view that you can see up along the ridge line. So again, it was a lot of fun to just sort of crop sections. I didn't feel like I had to capture a huge portion of the canyon. Compositionally, I'm more interested in thinking about, parts of architecture or parts of the landscape as a piece to my larger compositional puzzle, and really thinking about those contrasts and proportions. So it just, for me, it made a lot more sense to zoom in and crop out some of the larger details. Plus, it gave me a chance to really think about some of the subtle shifts in the planes of the structure of the form. The way that these rock walls sort of move in space and how color and values shift very gradually between those different planes. And I think all of these paintings are still available too if you're interested. They're they're kind of mounted on panels, and then they're cradled and framed in handmade black frames that I made over the summer last year. This is an 8 by 10 inch painting, also made in Rocky Mountain National Park, which is right by Estes Park, Colorado. Max and I, we were having a really great morning because it was sunny. There were painters, at Bear Lake, so we felt like we were part of the convention community still. And then right after lunch, probably around 2 o'clock, the clouds kind of rolled in through the park, and the sky turned gray, and all of these beautiful contrasts of sunlight just totally disappeared, and everything was very dark and moody and washed out, and it actually started raining fairly heavily. It wasn't like thunderstorming, thankfully, but it was definitely like pretty consistent, moderate amount of rain. And we kind of were eating our lunch in his car, just talking like, well, what do we do? Do we start driving back? Like, it sounds like a lot of the artists are just going to start heading home because this was the last scheduled part of the convention. So after the time in the park, you kind of were just left to do what you wanted. You could stay in Colorado, you could leave and go home, you could go somewhere else. But the convention was officially over once we kind of got to the park, and people kind of did their own thing. There really wasn't a lot of scheduled demonstration or lecturing or critiquing or anything like that. It was really self-guided at that point. So we looked at each other and thought, well, we drove an hour and 20 minutes, maybe an hour and 45 to get where we are in the park. Why don't we just wait this out and see what happens? And maybe there's a place with covering that we can paint under. So Max was super excited. It was mostly his idea. I could tell he was very excited to stay and paint in the park, and I was open. I was like, I'm good to do whatever you want to do. Like, you drove. I was fun to paint a couple paintings, but if these are all I make, I can live with that. And I like these paintings, and so we drove around for like 2 hours, maybe 3 hours before we found this spot of what is this called? I'm gonna try to remember this title of this painting. Moraine. I think it's called Moraine Park, like kettle moraine. And I remember titling this painting "More Rain in the Park," so it's kind of my little kind of goofy pun of a title for that one. And what was really enjoyable about this painting was I kind of shifted my focus from those last few paintings where I said I was cropping in and really thinking about small parts of the landscape. And I had seen this view of the valley and just these massive, monumental, like Bierstadt kind of mountainscape scenes. And I was like, I really want to try to, study at least the atmosphere with the rain and these like receding mountain ridges in this view, combined with all of the fog and just the subtle warm and cool tones through the sky where the sun was still partly visible. And so I'm like, I'm going to try this bigger, more expansive composition. And I think it really worked out. It was a lot of fun to paint. It was a lot of fun to work with a limited primary palette. I think this is made with ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, and cadmium yellow medium. I think that was my palette for actually all 3 or all 4, however many paintings I made with oils at the park. I think they all shared that same color palette. And then titanium white is my 4th color technically. But it was fun to work in this very muted achromatic range of colors and grays, and thinking a lot about simplification in areas of scale, contrast and scale. So how do I convey that this tree is the size that it is in front of this massive mountain range with beautiful peaks and contours and shifts in value and color properties. So that's really what brought me to this scene and held my attention for like 2 hours when I painted this sketch on paper. And I remember Max and I found this parking lot up by, I think it's called the Moraine Discovery Center, and they had this really big public parking lot. I think because of the storm and because it's kind of early in their season, there really wasn't a lot of traffic. Excuse me. So it was really easy to find parking, and we painted under these trees, these really big pine trees that were dense enough that very few drops of rain made it all the way down to where we were standing. And he was maybe 100 feet, 200 feet off, to the other side of the parking lot, looking at a similar view. So we weren't painting together necessarily, but we were definitely painting in the same area during this time. And it was a lot of fun. It was fun. It was a fun way to deal with the rain. It was a fun way to deal with that time in the afternoon. So we kind of hung out and made these late afternoon paintings of the storm, which was a lot of fun. And I think that might have been the last painting I made with the convention, the plein air convention. This is another Cresta Butte painting. It's a very small 4-inch by, I think, 8-inch painting. Oils on gessoed paper again. This is looking at, I don't even know the names of some of these mountain ranges in Cresta Butte, unfortunately, but there was this road. It's hard to tell that this is a little road right here that curves around this really big aspen tree. And that road is what I took to come in and paint this view. So I'm standing on the side of that particular road, which kind of wraps you around the canyon as you come into Cresta Butte. I want to say from maybe the northwest area of the valley, but don't take my word on that, because again, I was only there for 24 hours. But anyway, this view I painted twice actually. So I stayed here and I made 2 paintings. There was this small one, which my favorite part of this painting is probably the sky, just the very compressed value and chromatic contrasts between the gray and the blue. Like, this is something it's good for me to look at this, because sometimes I make my clouds and my skies a little too high contrast, and it's nice when there are these subdued atmospheric relationships of color and edge quality. So it's pretty satisfying. What's interesting about this painting is that the sky corner of blue here is almost the same color as this mountain. So this is actually a mountain peak that we're seeing on the horizon, even though it looks like it could be the sky. Like this is just a break in the big section of clouds. So anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting. And then this is the first painting I made in Cresta Butte right when I got there. I remember I left Denver at I left my Airbnb at 7 a.m. and I drove straight to Cresta Butte. I think I got to Cresta Butte at 12 something. So I still had the whole second half of the day to make some paintings. And then I was going to stay there overnight in another Airbnb. And then on Sunday, I think it was Friday was when we were in Estes Park at Rocky Mountain National Park. Saturday morning I drove to Cresta Butte, and then I painted Saturday afternoon in Cresta Butte, and then I got up early on Sunday, painted pretty much until I want to say 4 o'clock or so, and then I drove from Crested Butte back to Denver, where I met up with a college classmate of mine and her boyfriend and had dinner with them. And then I drove to the airport at like 10 o'clock at night on Sunday, stayed in the airport at Denver for like, I don't know, I think it was like 10 hours or so. So I just stayed there all night, pulled an all-nighter, kind of slept on the floor of the airport for like 3 hours, and then got up at like 6:30 to check in to my flight, hung out at the gate for a few more hours, and then I flew home. So that was my weekend in May, and I loved it. You know, those types of trips and adventures right now at this time in my life are a lot of fun and totally worth it. So when I look at some of these paintings, those are the things that kind of come to mind, are just the logistics of traveling and, you know, this like solo travel lifestyle that I get to kind of put that hat on for a week or 2 weeks at a time. And I learn a lot about people. I learn a lot about time and place and memory, and, you know, just really connecting to every moment that's passing. And I wish I could somehow find a way to do this every week, you know, on a weekly basis, but it's a lot more noticeable when I'm on these types of trips. So this was the first painting I made in Crested Butte. And I think we might be out of the Colorado. Oh, no, this is the other Crested Butte painting of that same view that I was talking about a couple of images ago, kind of looking at the bend of the road. This is the largest painting I made in Crested Butte. This is 10 by 10 inches, and this painting, along with the other three oil paintings I made in Crested Butte, they were all mounted on plywood panel, as I mentioned, and then I oiled out the surface so they have a very even kind of sheen, and made custom frames for all of them. I built a shipping crate, custom shipping crate, and shipped them out to Crested Butte for the Plein Air Festival that Sean Horn Gallery hosted. And unfortunately, none of the paintings sold during the festival, which was definitely a little bit of a bummer. But what was really exciting was that Sean had reached out a few weeks after the festival ended in August, and had invited me to, you know, keep the paintings with his gallery and let him try to continue to sell them locally through the gallery. So all of those paintings are still available, to my knowledge, with Sean Horn Gallery at the time of this recording on March 22nd of 2024. But yeah, if you're interested, take a look. I mean, the prices vary from, I think, like $500, $400 to $500, up to like $1,500 or $1,600. If I had to guess, I think that's where I'd priced these paintings. So just for some reference there. But this one was a lot of fun to paint. I really liked the composition of the strong diagonal leading you into the tree, the grouping of trees, these aspens, and I was really focused on abstracting information and trying not to render anything, and working really quickly. You know, which is interesting to think about, is this idea of time and how much time we have available to us. I'm gonna let my dog out really quickly. Excuse me. Looks like Lenny is having fun running around in the snow today. So anyway, you know, not having as much time to paint, sometimes it forces me to work really quickly, obviously, and that leads to different results than if I can keep coming back to the same location day after day or week after week. And knowing that limited amount of time puts a different kind of pressure on us as painters. And sometimes that pressure is actually really helpful, and it's a really good thing, because it leads us to make decisions that we're not overthinking, or we're not being too precious about the process, or, you know, it forces us to take some chances and risks and just try things to see it on the painting, and respond really quickly. And this painting represents that type of speed and frequency of mark and decision making for me. And obviously I look at this and I'm like, oh, there's things that maybe I would want to add to it, but at the same time I'm like, I kind of love the way that it turned out. I love all of the variety of marks, all of these different shapes and textures, and varieties in color and chroma or value. And compositionally, like I was just saying, it's pretty satisfying, some of these larger shapes that break up the composition into big pieces. So this one was a lot of fun to paint. Now, let me just check. I think we're out of Colorado and the Plein Air Convention, which was in May. And so then late May, early June, was getting ready for the Paint Cedarburg event. And I remember I painted this view of Port Washington with a limited palette. I don't remember now the colors that I used, because I think I had mixed up what I would call original colors. So they're not colors right out of a tube. Everything starts, as a color out of the tube if you're buying ready-made oil paint, but you can take a couple of colors and make up a new mixture. And what's nice about doing that is that it gets you away from habits that you might have as a painter in solving certain problems. Like some people, I think, probably have these like ready to go formulas and solutions to dealing with color. And if they see a certain color contrast in light and shadow, there's certain colors that they always want to go to, and certain pigments that they like to use for sunlit areas, things like that. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's fun to sort of step away from that way of thinking and just open up your process to discovery and to trying something new and learning something new, by letting go of control and letting go of expectations a little bit. So this was a painting, I think, that allowed me to find its way through a route that I could not have predicted. And it was a lot of fun to work with certain colors as this dark teal kind of color. I went into this painting having mixed up like 6 different piles of paint from my normal palette of colors. And maybe I had 1 or 2 colors in my bag that are not like staple colors to my palette, but for the most part I had mixed up all of these kind of like unique neutrals. And I went into the painting knowing, okay, this teal is going to be my darkest dark, which is a lot of times with this scene, it's going to be the tires, it's going to be, areas underneath the cars, it's going to be some of the black like windshield wipers, really dark shadows in other areas of the space and the scene. So that gave me something as like, okay, I know one end of my painting is going to be this color in terms of value. And then I had some of these different warm brights, like these kind of yellowy, creamy, orange colors and greenish colors. And I knew that was sort of my top end of my value scale. So that gave me a reference when I started painting to know where to preserve and where to place certain pieces of my color palette. And everything else could kind of fit in between those two extremes. So it was a lot of fun to work that way and to just sort of, again, really think about shape and mark and line and fragmenting information so it's a little bit more abstract. And this idea, which I've talked a lot about in these live streams, of seeing how much I can get away with when I talk about information or representation versus abstraction, and how much can I reduce the depiction of the form before it's totally non-objective and too removed for recognition, and riding that line is always really, really exciting as a painter when you work from observation. Okay, and we saw that one. So now we're moving forward again. This is a painting I made for my hosts at the Door County Plein Air Festival, which is in July. So again, some of this is out of order chronologically, but I can promise you that if you buy my zine, that all of the paintings will be in chronological order in the gallery. So for me, when I look at artists' work and portfolios, especially if it's like an annual publication, it's satisfying to look at the cover or to look at the book from cover to cover in chronological order. Because I think as you move through a portfolio, you start to see these moments of experimentation that lead to new discoveries and that lead to new ways of thinking and new ways of organizing and just painting in general. And seeing that lineage of experimentation, I think, is really useful as a viewer. So anyway, the video today is a little bit out of order, but this is with gouache on a paper panel that was sealed with the the varnish and wax combination. It's just a quick kind of one session, like late morning painting, the day of the reception for the Door County Plein Air Festival. So you have to drop your paintings off on, I think, Thursday or maybe it's Friday. Now I can't remember the drop off. It's either noon on Thursday or I think it might be Friday. And then that evening, we come back and do our artist choice voting, and then they do the awards, and then the exhibition opens to patrons. But anyway, that block of time I had in the morning after I dropped off my paintings, and kind of, I guess, early afternoon is when I made this painting up in Newport Beach State Park. And the composition was a lot of fun to work with, these big shapes and these, in contrast to all of these little negative shapes and almost like stained glass kind of windows of color were a lot of fun to mimic in what I saw in the space. This is my quick paint from the Door County Festival last year in 2023. And this is an oil painting on a custom canvas panel that I made. It's 5 inches wide by 25 inches tall. There's another painting from last year that's the same dimensions, but it's a a landscape orientation. And for the quick paint, I was like, well, this isn't going to go in the gallery. They typically don't go in the gallery because it's like at the end of the event. And it's shown outdoors under a tent. And I knew that if I wanted to do a vertical with this format between one of the two canvases, during the main exhibition, you have to fit all of your paintings within a certain height and width of your wall. And because this is such a narrow painting, it takes up a lot of space if you flip it vertically, but it doesn't take up as much space if you flip it, horizontally. The width of the frame, I think, was like 29 inches. And so it stayed within the boundaries of the wall restrictions either way, but it would have been risky to do it vertically for the main show. So I'm glad I tried it with the quick paint. And this is the sidewalk view of Fish Creek. During the quick paint, I was standing on the corner of the main road that cuts through Fish Creek and one of the offshoots that will take you into the harbor area. And what I liked about this view, obviously, is the big cast shadow had a really nice dramatic contrast to the light that was falling on the sidewalk and onto the cars parked on the street. It was a lot of fun to abstract and just gesturally portray movement and people walking and activity off in the horizon. And while I was painting, there were a lot of people walking up and down the sidewalk, but I liked that the painting was fairly open with these big shapes. And the other thing that I really love about this particular painting is the range in paint quality. So there's moments where it's very kind of washy and gritty down here in the lower half of the painting, and then as you move up the canvas, it gets more and more opaque, and there's flatter shapes and denser areas of color. Let me grab my dog real quick. And then so this was a painting that, like all of the quick paint paintings, they're auctioned off with a live auctioneer. And a family who owns one of my paintings already bid on the paint, and they won the bid and purchased this painting. So it's really cool to think about private collections starting to grow with multiple paintings of mine. And they actually now own, between the father and the son, they own 3 of my paintings, which is really exciting. The other thing I really like about this particular painting is that the foreground, it bends the perspective so far that you're actually starting to see almost where my feet and where the easel were located on this sidewalk. So I remember I had my easel set to the right, and I was looking at this little, kind of gap between a building, which you can kind of see a little bit here in the upper left, and then the sidewalk, and then it was my easel and my painting on the right side of that. So in between I was studying everything I could see on the sidewalk, and down at the foreground is where the sidewalk curb came up along the buildings and started to curve where I was standing on that corner, and it was a lot of fun to paint the textures and the color shifts and the details of the sidewalk down in the foreground there. This is something I would love to keep playing with, this sort of compositional format and elongating a vertical scene like this, because it allows you to really think about a narrative viewing experience. It's really hard when you have a very elongated panel to see it all at once. So it sort of forces viewers to have to start in one end and work to the other end. And that sense of time and movement visually from one side to the other is really, conceptually, that's very interesting to me. So it'd be fun to do this and have something a little bit more dramatic happen on one end, to really push that idea of movement and time and like a narrative unraveling. And then, as we can kind of see, the paint is fairly opaque and thick in its texture. So I was having a lot of fun building up more of a physical presence with the paint and letting things be a lot looser and expressive in some of these moments up here. So this is probably one of my favorite paintings I made last year. There's a lot that, like I've been saying, I really want to sort of revisit some of these ideas in this particular painting. But anyway, let's keep moving. This is another Door County Plein Air Festival painting. You can actually see this. Well, it's kind of blurry, but behind me on the wall there, this is the painting we're looking at now. And so it's a 10-inch by 20-inch painting, pretty good sized painting, a 1:2 ratio. And if you're familiar with my plein air work from 2022, you might find that it's kind of familiar looking, and it's similar to the Door County Best of Show painting that I made in 2022. Part of that was kind of intentional, part of it was unintentional. I just happened to really like this driveway scene of Fish Creek. So this is actually a couple blocks away from that last painting on the same road. And if you were walking down that sidewalk off into the horizon and just kept going for like maybe a half a mile or maybe a quarter mile, you would get to this spot of the driveway scene here. And what I like about this painting is the composition it really functions on a dramatic contrast of proportion, right? So we have a very small shape that's almost like a triangle here in the upper third, upper right corner of the composition. We have this slightly diagonal vertical element on the right that kind of cuts us off from the view and leads us out of the painting on this side. The horizon of shadow to light here, where light is open, the space is open, we can see the light casting on the landscape there. That contrast in line kind of cuts us off horizontally, and then we have this really big open shape on the left with a diagonal kind of leading us towards that bottom left corner. So there are a few very strong compositional elements that are holding the structure, or what we could call the armature of the painting, together. And what was very fun for me to do in making the painting was think about contrast and variety in moments of the painting, as opposed to creating this unifying amount of information, or this homogeneous sort of amount of detail or variety and mark, and instead reserving it for the focal area and allowing very big sections of the painting to be reduced and simplified in variety. And most of the variety in those areas really is coming from the brushwork, actually, the direction of the line, the character of the paint, whether it's opaque or more translucent. In a lot of these areas, you can see it's fairly thin paint, and I'm kind of working in almost like a glaze in some of these moments here. This was a 2-session painting. The second session really didn't have a lot of additions, I could say. Like, most of the painting was made in the first session. I just wanted to go back and double check some of my color contrasts and heighten some of those borders between areas of varying hues, those kinds of things, and just some small details of the boats off in the harbor here. It was a lot of fun to try to convey the warmth and glow of atmosphere way off along the bay and on this tree line here. That was probably my favorite part of the painting process in this one. This was a painting I made in Bailey's Harbor, which was one of the 2 paint outs that I signed up for in 2023. I talked about that a little bit in my 2022 portfolio. So if you watched that one, you're familiar with that aspect of the festival, that you have to sign up for 2 of these 3-hour sessions in 2 different locations throughout the week. And I think both years I've done it like Tuesday and Thursday, or maybe Monday and Thursday, or Monday, Wednesday. And this was one I made in Bailey's Harbor, which I also had painted in 2022. It was the barbecue food truck painting by the hotel or motel. So this is actually across the street from that motel, and I was up on the patio of a restaurant, kind of like one story off of the main street, which, looking back now, I think that might have been a little bit frustrating for some of the patrons, because we don't have flags, or we don't have a map that tells people where we're painting during these paint outs, and they just have to kind of go to that area and walk around and try to find us. And for some people, I know it was hard to see me, but I still had probably 40 visitors while I was working on this painting. And what we're looking at is this horizontal sliver of this restaurant, and I think it's called Chive, maybe. And there's a window right off of the patio that you can see the inside of the restaurant. There are tables and chairs, and then there's another window on the other side of the building. And then over here on the right side is the street view with a sign from another restaurant across the street, and a little bit of the parking of vehicles on that street as well. And this probably, I don't know, this was a painting that I envisioned it going a different direction than it actually turned out, which is always hard to accept as an artist and a painter sometimes, is that, the more of a detailed vision of a painting that you have in your mind, the higher the likelihood is that you're going to have a very extreme response to the way that the painting turns out. So you're either really going to love it because it's close to what you had in mind, or you're going to not like it because it's not like what you had in mind. And unfortunately, this was a painting that, I don't dislike the painting. It's just there's things about it where I'm like, it just didn't get where I wanted it to be. And part of that is just the challenge of working within that 3-hour time frame, unless you're able to come back and work on it more. You're dealing with the limited amount of time. You're picking a spot within a space that you've already kind of had to commit to, and then you have visitors coming and engaging with you and asking questions and responding to the painting, and which those are all things I love to experience and encounter while I'm painting. But it's dealing with some of those challenges while you're also trying to reach a certain point in the painting is hard to find that right balance. And as I've said in past streams, I'm a very chatty artist when I'm painting in plein air, and I wasn't able to come back and work on this painting. I don't think, it's hard to remember now if I came back, but I'm pretty sure I did all of this just in that one day, and I stayed for an extra hour past the 3-hour mark and tried to really clean things up and get things a little bit more resolved. But I'm happy though, because there was a collector during the exhibition that really liked the painting and purchased the painting, and it's always reassuring, is that like our own subjective taste isn't the end all be all for our own process. Sometimes you just have to make something and put it out there, and the right person will find it and love it and enjoy it. And that's part of the point of making art and sharing art, is to let other people have different opinions about what we make and how we feel about it and the value of it. whether it was successful or not. It's not just up to us. So even if you're not selling your paintings, I think it's good to just share what you're making and get feedback and, see something from a different perspective. And I think it's also good with that to be vulnerable and to, maybe have some criticism, because I think that's partly where we find growth and where we find, a new understanding of why something isn't working the way that we want it to, or problems that we're maybe not even aware of and noticing. So anyway, this painting is I think 6 by 12 inch painting, and it was painted in the Sister Bay during the Sunset Paint Out that's during the Plein Air Festival in Door County. And it's similar to the other paint outs where you have kind of a 3-hour window that you have to be at that location painting. And I think it starts at like maybe 6 o'clock and runs until almost 9 o'clock. Usually by like 8:30, maybe it's from like 5 to 8. And then at 8 o'clock, we bring our paintings over to the Door Hotel lawn and display the paintings for the public to come and look at. And then we have little lights that the school provides. And it's a really fun event. It's fun to, build some new relationships during the week before the exhibition, and just to see paintings by your peers in the show and these amazing artists that are also painting there during the week. And anyway, so this was the one that I made in 2023, which compositionally I'm really happy with. It was a fun way to crop some of the boats. I ended up painting this like while I was kneeling down on one of the docks, which again, kind of like the Bailey's Harbor painting, was a little bit of a hidden spot from the public. So I think some people were sort of like, hey, we were looking for you, we couldn't find you. So I wonder if maybe if I was in a similar situation, if there's a way to like have a flag or some sort of a marker that, shows people where I'm painting if I'm hidden. Because it's not intentional to avoid people. It's really just like, hey, this is the view that I really am drawn to within this space. Because I don't typically paint harbors and boats in plein air these days. So some of these places are challenging in that regard to find a composition that I'm really excited about. But I think that's also good too. You have to be willing to put yourself in new places to break out of old habits and to continue to push the envelope and try new things. So this was a pretty complicated painting, and it's one that I don't find to be as successful as I would have liked it to have been. It's like the most politically correct way to say it. I don't think it turned out very well. But what I'm trying to say is like there's aspects about it still that I think are worth revisiting and worth learning from still. And this was a 2-session painting. Like I wasn't able to get as far during that sunset paint out. I spent like the first hour just walking around trying to figure out what to paint. So this next year I'm going to go to the location prior to the sunset paint out and just do some sketches and figure out a composition ahead of time, because I have fallen in the habit of just taking a lot of time searching for a subject and prolonging the painting process, so that way when it's time to show the painting, I have something that's a little bit more resolved and finished. Jane is saying that she likes the way the masts stitch it together. Yeah, I'm glad that you feel that way, because that was the thing initially that drew me to this composition, was the shapes of the covers and the masts of the boats. How they kind of broke up the composition and led us in and out of these different corners and areas of the scene. Like this nearby blue rolled up mast was one of my favorite parts of the scene to paint, and that's really what drew me to this location. I was looking for contrast in like value and color, and when you're looking towards a sunset, it's hard to figure out what's going to contrast all of these warm, buttery kind of colors in the sky to give the painting something to create variety, right? And to create a moment of difference for a focal point or emphasis. And originally that was the part that I thought was like, okay, this is what I'm going to use to kind of ground the image. That combined with the diagonal, beam or other like vertical or diagonal mast of the boat. Anyway, my terminology with boats is very limited. So if you're a boat connoisseur, sailboat connoisseur, I apologize because I do not know the anatomy of what I'm pointing to here. But that's what really drew me to this initial composition. And I also liked that it had a little bit of like a receding, weaving effect, that just the slight diagonals leading us down to the right corner here, coming up, and then following these different chunks of, aquatic or, nautical architecture, I guess you could say. The other area that I do really am pretty happy with, like one of the few areas I'm really happy with, is the flag and this mast off kind of in the distance, and the shapes that it created in negative space. If I could have just painted that, I think I would have loved the painting a lot more, because that was something that had so much subtlety in color variety, in shape variety, value, compression, because it's sort of backlit by the sunset. You have these really kind of soft transitions of value in some of that. So if we have to paint there again, maybe that's what I'll try to get to, is get a closer view of the flags and try to paint that. If something like that is there again, I guess we'll have to wait and see. I still have this painting here in my studio. This is the other 5" by 25" or 1x5 panel that I made and brought to the event. This was one of the first paintings I completed during the Door County Festival. This is up in Gills Rock, which was my favorite place to paint in 2023 in Door County. And I never, explored that part of the peninsula in 2022. And so going into last year's event, one of the things I've really intentionally tried to seek out was a new location that I hadn't visited the year prior. And Gills Rock was something that I had kind of been like looking at in my Google Maps, and during the first day of the event, and I was like, well, let's go north. I didn't really go north last year, and so I started driving up like through Ephraim and up to Gills Rock, and I'm trying to remember the other harbor that's over there. I'm forgetting, because I painted a truck that we'll look at here in a second that was in this other location that's kind of, I think it's on the way to Gills Rock, or it's just past Gills Rock. Anyway, this was in a little fishing port right in Gills Rock, and I painted 3 paintings here, like in this same little parking lot kind of port area. There's a ton of character and interesting shapes and bits and pieces of fishing material and tools, and there's all of these like land docked or dry docked boats along the shore. And in this particular composition, I was very interested in showing a wide, almost like fisheye perspective. So I chose to stand right off the corner of this little boat shack building, and I liked that the corner of the building gave us this like little 2-point perspective moment, and down the main portion of the painting, all of these wood paneling lines lead us towards this other like focal area, which those are compositional devices that I've been really exploring a lot the last 2 or 3 years now, and I feel like I'm getting to a point where I'm finding a rhythm, I'm finding kind of a voice with composing in this way. It's allowing me to find compositions in almost any place, in thinking about obstructing the view, and thinking about proportions of shape, and thinking about angles, the way that a shadow kind of leads you through this cropped view of the space. And that's really what that's really what composing is. It's all about organizing the parts of your subject matter, and not in like rearranging them, but more so in deciding how you want to frame them, how much of the space you want to show, how much visual weight you want to give a certain part of the subject. So for me, it's like, okay, I really like this clustering of boats. Everything to the left of this boat here was also very interesting, but I liked the paneling of the building. I liked the big solid shape and how that was going to contrast all of the smaller shapes in this area. And then also the shadow, which led us to these orange buoys on the side of the building. So it had like 3 or 4 really key dynamic contrasts when I made my little thumbnail drawing, because I was looking through my little paper viewfinder, which was only about that big, and I held it up against my eyes so I could see this corner of the building on the one side, and just had to quickly, block in some of those key proportions of what I could see in the viewfinder in my sketchbook. But yeah, this is one that came together really nicely. I felt like I hit the ground running. This was kind of the first painting I made in Door County, and had finished. This was a 2-session painting, I'm pretty sure, but that might not be correct. I can't remember now. But anyway, this is one of the other 3 paintings I made in Gills Rock. So this was like a 2 or 3 session painting. I remember it was one of my favorite paintings I made last year. Compositionally, I think this might be one of my best compositions I've ever made in plein air, just personally speaking, if I can toot my own horn a little bit here. I really love the way that space is presented through these big pieces of physical materials, right? So we have a sort of a van truck in the foreground dominating the lower half of the composition and breaking us into this interesting almost like fanning out type of shape and line. And I like the way that led us into some of these vertical posts and like birdhouses here, off of sort of like this central moment of directional, almost, what's that called? There's a compositional term where things come to a central point. Now this is really going to bug me if I can't think of this. Anyway, maybe I'll think of this term later, but there's a category when you're studying composition that talks about this sort of like central point where all lines kind of come back to this central point. But anyway, I like that there are a lot of edges that kind of lead us back to this corner of the truck. There's so many parts about this painting that I could talk about, but for the sake of time, I don't want to get too deep into it. Maybe this is a painting I could do a separate live presentation on and really talk about the color palette and the process and all of the varieties and why it's something that I'm still very happy with. So I don't want to talk too much about it right now, but what I liked about this painting too was when I started working on this, I think I started this painting right after I finished the last one. So I think that last one was a 1-session painting, if I remember correctly. And then, I was walking around the rest of Gills Rock in this little fishing spot, looking for other views with my viewfinder. I was making sketches. I found this interesting grouping of delivery trucks for the fishing company that operates out of some of these buildings. And I initially was going to paint them from like the back, from far away. So they were going to be much smaller, sort of like characters in the painting. And then I think I did 1 or 2 sketches like that. But I was like, maybe I'll walk up to them and see if there's anything kind of exciting up close. And man, am I happy that I did that, because when I came up in between the trucks, then I started to realize like, wow, space becomes so much more dramatic if I stand really close to something in front of this wider kind of space, and being able to see the water off in the horizon was really satisfying in this painting too. So there's all of these different pieces that I think hit new categories for me as a plein air painter that made the painting just very exciting. It allowed space for me to explore the window motif and the self-portrait. It allowed me to think about abstraction and light being shone through and reflecting on the surface. So I enjoyed trying to match some of the color shifts in the reflection of the window, this kind of like mauve-y gray bright value in light being reflected, and just the way that reflected shapes start to kind of warp and bend as this windshield curves around. So yeah, there's a lot that I could talk about. So maybe I'll wait and I'll think about maybe doing more of a painting case study. Maybe that could be something I could do with future live streams once I'm through all of my portfolios. This painting sold during the exhibition, which was really satisfying that it connected with a collector and they really liked it, and it's one of my favorite paintings I made last year. So that's always kind of the cherry on top, is knowing that somebody also liked it enough to purchase it and bring it into their private collection. And then this is the third painting that I made in Gills Rock, and this was the largest canvas that I brought last year. I've gone down in scale just a little bit between year 1 in Door County and year 2 in Door County. And what's interesting about this painting is that this was a 1-session painting. I didn't have time to go back and add anything to it. I had a little bit of time, but it would have added a lot of extra stress on that portion of the week, and I just figured it might be better to go, kind of end the painting with 1 session. And I really liked the freshness of this particular painting. The last painting is called Big Wheels, by the way, and I think it's 22 by 22 inches. This one is titled Compressed. I think it's titled Compressed Between a Truck and a Cool Space. I'm pretty sure that's the full title. Compressed Between a Truck and a Cool Space. And this one is 22 by 26 inches. So it's a little bit bigger than the other one. And it was fun because it got me out of working in square compositions. And it's nice to have something that's close to a square, but a little bit, off of the 1:1 ratio. And this is one that I made a pen compositional thumbnail with, and initially I had the focal area in the middle placed slightly off to one side, and I think I remember having to tape off my thumbnail and draw in, and I kind of I sort of moved part of the ratio of my thumbnail over just slightly in my sketchbook, and that allowed me to really consider, okay, where are the big shapes, where are the moments of variety going to happen, how do I want to think about atmosphere and light and contrast and color schemes and all of this stuff. And when it came time to make the painting, I just, again, kind of hit the ground running. I had a few colors on my palette that I was thinking about really grounding the color scheme, so that included my cadmium yellows, I think even cadmium green, a little bit of ultramarine blue, I think maybe a little bit of alizarin crimson. So there was kind of a purpley color that was still on my palette. It was this residue of other paintings that I had made during the week. And I had a big pile of that on the palette. So right off the bat, I had this big complementary color scheme to ground the painting in. And it started to lean more and more towards a greenish yellow and blue kind of color palette, which I really liked. So then it felt a bit more analogous as a color scheme and less complementary. But I could reserve some really big color contrasts for very particular small details of the painting. So this is looking through a boat. Basically what we're looking at is the truck that I painted in the Big Wheels painting that's in the foreground with the windshield. That's this truck here. And this is the rear view mirror of the truck. So when I painted the Big Wheels painting, I was standing right here looking, in that direction, if that makes sense. So the truck and then the water and the other truck is all looking down this way. So I painted this just a few feet from where I'd finished or was working on the Big Wheels painting. And I liked the way that the truck and the wall of the fishing, fish processing kind of shop sandwiched this view of the profile of a different boat that was parked right here. So this is a little bit of the tire that they use to keep the boat from, rocking up against the dock. And then, because the windows are here, you can see through the boat and see some of the water and the tree line behind the boat. And I just fell in love with all of these different shapes, all of these subtle shifts in tone and value, which are kind of the same thing, in chroma, and just the proportions of the shapes and the lines. Like, it had a lot of really dynamic movement throughout this interlocking web of shapes. And the painting, that the moment that really, I think, like, caught my eye and really like elevated this painting among the rest of the work that I made that week is that I feel like it had a freshness about it. There was a lot of variety in the amount of paint. Again, this painting is 22 inches tall by 26 inches wide. So some of these moments here, that's a pretty decent chunk of the painting. Those marks are probably about this wide. When you see the painting in person, it's probably like 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches wide, thick, like by like 1/4 inch thick amount of oil paint. So there's these moments of really buttery, textural impasto, where I'm just scooping a huge chunk of paint and basically like dragging it onto the surface of the painting. And that was something that was really eye-opening for me with this painting, was that, again, there's so many different categories of variety and creating contrast. And, there's a lot of moments here that really play with variety and mark making. They play with surface quality. They play with color properties. It was a lot of fun to paint the greenish reflection in the rear view mirror or the side mirror, and just the way that light was bouncing and reflecting off of different things. So I sort of treated the light, if light had a physical thing we could go out and touch, like if that was one color, I treated that like this yellowy kind of greenish yellow color. And in some areas it becomes more of a goldish, warm orangey yellow, like down here in the foreground. And I was really thinking about the way that light was bouncing and reflecting off of different forms and materials, whether that's the side of the truck because it has this like very smooth vinyl surface, or these air compressor tanks. That was really fun for me to really observe where light was continuing throughout all of these different objects and forms. And then this painting also was purchased by a private collector during the show, which was amazing. So on the opening night, both of my 2 big paintings had sold. So I felt like, all right, this has been a very successful event for me financially and even just creatively, to have people really respond to these ideas that I pursued, and the compositions and the choice of subject matter. Because during the week, no matter how many events I've done so far, I always hit moments where I'm like, I feel a little nervous. What if the paintings don't resonate with people? What if they don't land and they don't find their audience? And that's always kind of a risk when we're exhibiting our work. But in the format of a plein air event, all of those emotions happen really quickly, because it's like you check in, you're excited, nothing has happened yet, you're excited to see your friends and meet new people, your canvases are stamped, and everything just feels like endless potential, right? Like nothing has even started yet. And then once you start traveling around and you find subjects and you find things that are catching your eye, that excitement starts to really grow, and the potential starts to get more specific, but that also the potential starts to grow as well, because you're like, okay, I found what I want to paint. How I choose to paint that is still very open-ended. And then you start painting your subject, and you start to find things that you didn't see initially, or you start to really connect with the things that caught your eye in the first place. And you're solving problems now, and now you're building this relationship to something and a space and time, and you're feeling a connection to your work that's building as you make the painting, which is very satisfying. Right now, it's like the wheels are turning, things are happening, the ideas are developing and they're growing, and it allows us to start to steer the ship of the painting, right? And to start to direct the direction that we want to go with the work as we're responding to the process. So it's very fulfilling, right? It's like you're not thinking about, I have to find something, and you're not thinking about, well, does this finished thing have an audience? Like you're in the middle, and that's when like the most fulfilling moments are happening most of the time. But then once you're done with the painting, it's like, oh, right, I have to now go show this to an audience of people, to my peers, to a judge, to potential collectors. And now we see, what the response is going to be. And some paintings, I go into making them thinking like, okay, this is kind of this might be a little bit of a risky painting in the context of some of the plein air shows, in the context of maybe the gallery that's hosting the show, in the context of the community of art goers that live in that area. But there's something about the painting that needs to be made. And there's a reason why I still commit to making that painting, even though I know it's a little bit risky. And depending on who you talk to, that artists and collectors and gallerists and people in the community that know this process I'm talking about, some people will advise you to play it safe, and to do the thing that is going to sell, or to do the thing that maybe is going to resonate with a judge, or to a collector and to your peers. And that's one way to approach these opportunities. And then there's people like myself, I would say, who would advise, like, paint what you want to paint because you want to paint it, because it's something that you'll regret if you don't paint it, right? And like that should be the real criteria for selecting what you're painting, and for creating the mindset to make and to be a creator of something, right? To go into it with that authenticity of, I just really want to see this as a painting, and that's enough reason to start. And then I'll respond as I go from there. But, some of the paintings that I've made in 2023 had that feeling of anxiety and that feeling of worry and just a little bit of doubt and not knowing, like, well, we'll see how this turns out, and most of the time I feel fortunate because there is an audience there, and there are people who do want to see that kind of work, and whether it's my peers and or a collector, and best case scenario, like, obviously you make a painting that you wanted to make, you love the painting, you're super fulfilled and satisfied with the process and what you learned, and it generates all of this gratification. And best case scenario is like, then you enter it in the show, it gets an award, and somebody buys it, right? Like, that's the dream scenario. The second best thing is that you make the painting you want to make, you enter it in the show, it either gets an award or it sells, right? That's like second best scenario. Third best scenario, you make the painting that you want to make, but it doesn't get an award and it doesn't sell, and you get to take it home. In my opinion, like, that's the order of scenarios there at these events. And it's interesting because anytime I make a painting that I'm a little bit nervous to show, and then it sells or it gets an award, or maybe both happen simultaneously, it's just more of a reminder that, like, when you make something that really genuinely resonates with your passion, with your excitement, with your vision, with your voice as an artist, it's going to come through that this is an object that is really meaningful and significant to viewers when they look at the work, and I think that there is some sort of like physical residue of those emotions when your mind is in that sort of place as the maker of the work. Anyway, enough of my philosophical ranting about plein air events. This is another Door County painting. This is the truck painting I was just talking about, and I'm remembering the location is Ellison Bay in Door County in the peninsula there. And there's a little garage gas station off of the main street that takes you through Ellison Bay. And I think across the street is maybe like a hotel or a general store. But I saw this old kind of green pickup truck and really enjoyed the character of the vehicle, the body. I liked the curved kind of roof that it had. And then I also enjoyed this red pickup or tow truck, that's also in this cropped view of the parking lot here. So there was an interesting arrangement of complementary colors present in the local color palette of this space. So between the red and the green, this kind of bluish violet, and this ochre yellow of the front corner of a boat that was dry docked in the parking lot as well. So I saw this space, and I thought about perspective, and perspective was a huge design principle that I was really thinking a lot about intentionally during the Door County event, which you can probably tell by the ways that I sort of positioned myself in these different spaces, and how I could increase or enhance the dramatic effect of the perspective depending on where I was standing and how close I was to a certain area of the space. So I was standing right behind this pickup truck, and I liked my position because it brought the pickup truck's bed all the way up to the foreground and created this very dramatic sense of depth and perspective, and also just overlap in the space and the way that the bed cropped out or blocked out other details of the vehicles that were there. This was a one-session painting that took probably about 4.5 hours to paint, maybe a little bit longer, just because there was a lot of variety. This was my second paint out location that I selected. So there were people from the pallet pass holders that were coming and meeting me and seeing the painting and asking questions. I had a few people that hung out for like an hour, maybe 2 hours while I was painting, which was really nice. And I think it really helped my process for this painting, because it kind of it brought my focus to the foundations of art making and painting. So, I remember a friend of mine, Susan, forgetting her last name now, was there watching for a while. Or I'm trying to remember who else was there. It would take forever for me to remember all these different people that I've met at the shows, at the events. But anyway, there were a few people that came and sat for a while, and they were also painters, and they had very good questions about composition and paint and color palettes and value and edge quality and materials and some of these different like shop talk kinds of conversations. So engaging with that side of the process, I think it helped keep my focus on some of the fundamental aspects of making an image, like the composition and contrast and variety, and really thinking about the visual pathway that the eye goes through the composition with, and it was a very fun painting to make. This is one that sold during the opening reception, it's actually a silent auction. So, every painting has a little piece of paper where people can place that they can go up and write their name and their bid within a certain amount of time. And this is one that sold like 2 or 3 times the initial price that I had placed for the painting, which was very exciting to see. It was one of my smallest paintings in the exhibition. And there was a bidding war between two people, two different women, two different collectors at the show. And unfortunately, though, I found out like a month after the show that this painting was smudged during the pickup process at the school. And somehow, I think as people were moving paintings and boxing them up, they just didn't realize that there were some very wet passages of this painting, and it smeared. I haven't seen what it looks like, but I heard that it's sort of like in the truck section is where things kind of got smeared. So I have to reach out again. I've been in contact with the collector, but just over the months of the year, I just kind of got busy over the winter, and I have to reach out to her again and see if maybe this spring I can go pick up the painting and try to fix that portion of the painting. But anyway, that's, I think, the end of Door County's paintings, and I'm wondering here if maybe now would be a good time to take a break and maybe pause the stream, and I can come back and do a part 2 and finish the rest of the portfolio. And I think that's what I'm going to do. I think I'll probably wait to continue the next part until Monday of next week. I've been doing these live streams now for a while, and this is the 9th live stream. It's technically 9.2 because I totally goofed up on the other stream and ended it early. So I just want to again apologize for the mishap there. I promise that's something that won't happen again, at least not intentionally. And I just thank everyone who tuned in throughout the day today. It was a lot of fun to talk about these paintings. It was a lot of fun to talk about process and locations and stories, and go back and replay the tape on a very memorable year for my work and for my process. So thank you so much to everyone who tuned in, especially to Jane and to Todd. Todd Bradle, who participated in the chat and had some very good questions on materials and process and that kind of stuff. So, and everyone else who tuned in live, I appreciate you taking a moment out of your busy schedules to just sort of pop on and see what I was up to in the live stream. And if you're watching this as a recording after the fact, thank you as well for tuning in and learning more about this portfolio of paintings. If you're finishing this one, take a look at my YouTube channel. You might be able to find the part 2 of this portfolio, which I'll be recording here after the weekend. But I think that's going to be it for today's live stream. I'm very thankful and grateful for anyone who takes time to learn more about my process and ask questions. So if you have any comments or questions, or if you just want to share which of those paintings I talked about today was your favorite painting, that would be really fun to hear as well. If you've been to any of these places and you have any stories, feel free to share those too. It's always kind of fun. And then last but not least, if you're a painter and an artist, a plein air artist, and you want to just talk about the process or talk about tips and advice and experience, and feel free to add questions down in the comments of the video as well. Because I was having to kind of scramble and restart a new live stream after the mishap today, I don't know if our live chat is going to be viewable, but I'm hoping that I at least had vocalized a lot of the comments that I got in the chat today. So anyway, if you're free on Monday at 11 a.m., I'd love to see you during the day. I think I'll be able to tune in on Monday. I'm trying to think. I have a meeting actually Monday morning, so we'll see if it's at 11. I might have to bump it up or push it back to the evening. Maybe that'll be a little poll I'll put up on my YouTube channel and on social media. So anyway, thank you again for everyone who tuned in. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. If you've tuned in live, have a great weekend. Thank you, Jane, for the weekend comment there. It's very nice. And I will see, hopefully, many of you in a future video. I'm going to go and either work on the zine or maybe my taxes and get some progress done this weekend. So, all right, take care, everyone. Again, my name is Hector Acuna. You can find more of my work at acunaarts.com, which is, listed right there in the stream for you. You can also find my Instagram handles on my website as well. And if you're not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please consider subscribing. It's always fun to get some new faces and names over on the YouTube channel. So, all right, I think that's it. Take care, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and end the stream now, and hopefully everything is going to be up on YouTube here momentarily. Okay, have a nice day. Goodbye.